Hey guys, how's it going? Paulo with Meditation Amsterdam, and today I want to make the final video about Gurdjeff. So I created a few other little clips about the book In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky, who was a student of a man called G.I. Gurdjeff, an Armenian spiritual teacher in early 20th century Russia, who is quite well known actually, and who speaks very directly and also has a certain style of communication and a certain take on spiritual work that is very down to earth, but also quite a little bit of sort of grind your teeth and make and realize that this is not all fun and games. That's kind of his style. And I found it quite a valuable book because of its directness and because of the some of the bitter pills that need to be swallowed as you read the book. So before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you think that the content is cool. And with that said, I'm going to dive into a few quotes to illustrate the point of this last video. Looking at the previous ones, I talked about how Ouspensky considers man before doing any self-cultivation to be a multiplicity of entities that is in conflict with one another. He also thinks that spiritual work is long and bitter, and you need to put in quite a bit of effort, and that man is fundamentally asleep and mechanical unless this work is done. So you can always check out some of those other videos. This video is about this idea that transformation is through the body, and it's an embodied endeavor. So it is not a mental or imaginary type of thing or a logical type of thing, but really it is a very grounded in the body type of phenomenon. So he starts by saying things of the kind that I'm about to quote. So this is one of the quotes. He says that man has different centers, right? He has a thinking center, an emotional center, and a center of movement, which is down in the gut. And he says this alone makes independent work on himself impossible for a man. So he's talking about the difficulty of spiritual work. Says you must understand that the three principal centers, thinking, emotional, and moving, are connected together, and in a normal man they are always working in unison. That unison is what presents the chief difficulty in work on oneself. What is meant by this unison? It means that a definite work of the thinking center is connected with a definite work of the emotional and moving centers. That is to say, a certain kind of thought is inevitably connected with a certain kind of emotion or mental state, and with a certain kind of movement or posture. One evokes the other. He says that they are all interconnected with one another, and he says everything is connected and one thing cannot exist without another thing. So it's a single phenomenon, right? Thinking, moving, and emotion is a single thing, even though we tend to separate it and into a multiplicity. He also says ordinary man, even if he comes to the conclusion that work on himself is indispensable, is the slave of his body. He is not only the slave of the recognized and visible activity of the body, but the slave of the unrecognized and the invisible activities of the body, and it is precisely these which hold him in their power. Therefore, when a man decides to struggle for freedom, he has first of all to struggle with his own body. And so this brings an interesting angle, because here he really speaks directly to this idea that transformation is embodied transformation, and that unless the body believes it, it doesn't matter what the mind is saying. This is one of the reasons that trying to convince ourselves that we should be relaxed or that we should be confident tend to backfire, because even though the mind could be regurgitating some sort of I'm likable and I'm cool and people like me type of affirmations, it's not until the body believes it and accepts it fully that the transformation can take place. And he also shares here another interesting nugget, which is that a lot is happening in the body under the threshold of our perception. And that it is these unconscious events in the body, which can be observed if you become, if you practice, that those are the ones that happen to be running your life, right? It's the things that you can see, it's the reactivity and the restlessness or little pains and discomforts in the body. Those are the ones that drive you to act in certain ways. But they are, because they are going on unobserved, that's what gives them their power, right? So they're happening under your view, and then he says that you need to sort of bring them to the surface and then struggle with those in order for transformation to start taking place. And last but not least, something that I found very interesting. He says, so that each individual man's repertoire of postures and movements is very limited. He says that in accordance with his individuality, a man takes only a certain number of postures and movements possible for him. A man is unable to change the form of his thinking or his feeling until he has changed his repertoire of postures and movements. The forms of thinking and feeling can be called the postures and movements of thinking and feeling. Every man has a definite number of thinking and feeling postures and movements. Moreover, moving, thinking, and feeling postures are connected with one another in man, and he can never move out of his repertoire of thinking and feeling postures unless he changes his moving postures. An analysis of man's thoughts and feelings and a study of his movement functions arranged in a certain way show that every one of our movements, voluntary or involuntary, is an unconscious transition from one posture to another, both equally mechanical. It is illusion to say our movements are voluntary. So this is interesting for several reasons. So here, in my view, he departs almost entirely from what traditional psychology and psychoanalysis would advocate for, which is this idea that you ought to analyze yourself very deeply and analyze your past, analyze your tendencies, and these kind of things. And he is hinting at the fact that the way you carry and use your body has a direct effect on the centers of emotion and thought. But he is also advocating for transformation through the body, observing the body, noticing your patterns of movement, posture, and the effect that has on your thinking and your emotions. So we are now coming to learn that trauma is processed through the body, that acceptance happens with the body as opposed to accepting things with your mind, or that's a nice addition that follows later. But the mind typically tends to make up stories and claim credit for work that is actually being done by the body, really. This is one of the reasons that transformational, especially Eastern transformational methods such as yoga and Tai Chi work a lot with the body. And even in the West, you have certain disciplines. I mean, Gurdjeff himself created some sort of ballet dance that was meant to trigger transformation. We have seen other types of philosophies that really invite you to work with the body quite a lot. I don't personally trust transformational methods that don't work with the body, that only work with the mind. Even if you are doing mental work, it needs this very deep groundedness to take any real effect. Else you end up just spinning your wheels with mental thought and activity. Right. So I hope that's informative. I hope it also brings into context the thinking of Gurdjieff around the fact that we are this fragmented mechanical entity at the start of our journey, and then through embodied practices we become an integral individual or an integral system that he first of all creates and coalesces into a center and eventually doesn't require that center anymore. And that transformation is long and arduous for many, and for most, in fact, unless you are really willing to eat all the bitter about the emotions that you've typically repressed. And finally, this idea that it's the body that's the vehicle for transformation. It's the body that's the problem, and it's the body that is also the solution. And that sensations in the body is the thing to really deal with and to become very much acquainted with, deeply acquainted with, so that we can facilitate that process. And that's that. So this is it. That's the last video about Gurdjeff. I'll probably progress onto other books if I think that's appropriate. Or I'll just continue to making some other videos about topics that keep popping up in my mind as we go along. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you think it's worth subscribing and liking the video, and I'll be back with more. Cheers.